So this opened up the annual shareholders meeting, and then Howard came out with no introduction after that, and spent 20 minutes, actually more than that, 30 minutes, talking about not the health of our business, not how much profit we made, not our sort of our prospects for growth, but really the importance of leading with values and being the kind of organization that I think is authentically true to who you are. And showing up in a way where you can use your scale for good and actually balance the profit that you make with the social conscience and the kind of attitude that says we're going to get engaged in the communities where our people live and work and do so in an authentic way. So, and you saw a little bit in terms of the people who were featured here. One of the women that was on the video, Sheena Wright, is the CEO of the Abyssinian Development Corporation in Harlem. And they're one of two organizations that we work with where we're taking half the profits from a local store and we're effectively giving it to that organization with the theory that that community will be much more invested in the store and therefore create more profit, which will therefore in turn give us more profit that they share back. So some good examples, some interesting examples, things that resonated for us. I think they resonated for our shareholders. And they created an interesting dialogue. Joe Nocera from the New York Times, who writes a column a couple times a week. He's actually going to be here in Seattle next week for his birthday. But he wrote a piece just prior to the annual meeting, and effectively the point that he was making was not one that we suggested that he make, but one that he came to us with, which was basically sort of comparing and contrasting an organization that would take this kind of approach during its annual meeting and what was happening with Goldman Sachs at that moment in time, where they had one of their senior-most traders who had left the organization written a sort of scathing critique of the values of the organization, and Joe sort of used those to compare with one another. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything inherently flawed, bad, or horrible about Goldman, nor am I holding us up as any kind of example. It was just interesting that that was the media's take on doing something that we thought was a little unusual. Maybe it was a lot unusual, which is kind of leading with values rather than your balance sheet.
That's great. Thanks, Greg. In the interest of time, because I know we have to move on, and I did want to get some questions from the audience. Do you have a few minutes for it? Just to grab a couple questions?
Yeah.
I was very interested with this organizational structure that you have. If you can talk about the role of digital media as a connecting force throughout, because you have suppliers, customers, community, with everybody. You have everybody involved in using digital media. And when I first, a couple years ago, I heard someone come in from Starbucks and talk about kind of what they were doing, which was kind of very early on. And it seems to me that this company should have a really interesting modern model for it. And it is an evolving model, so I'm just wondering how it's impacted it. Is there such a thing as somebody who owns it, or is it or is it deployed, or is it task force?
So the question is digital media as a connective tissue between all the different functions and kind of how we think about it within a communications context. Digital media, the platforms themselves are actually owned by a different group. We have a chief digital officer. His name is Adam Brotman. He's a terrific partner, but it's a discrete and separate organization that actually lived in a couple of different places throughout the building up until recently. It lived sometimes in marketing, or part of the group lived in marketing, part of the group lived with our chief information officer, was really much more of a dev group. And Adam has brought those teams together so that the dev and the content side are effectively married up. So it doesn't discreetly live in public affairs. That said, we partner really closely with Adam and his team, and I think you've described it right, in the right way or properly, which is that we do see it as a connective tissue because we're all engaged in digital media to some extent. It's really changed, I think, the nature of publishing. I mean, I won't go on and on because we've all read a ton about it, but we're pretty deeply invested as a brand in digital media. I mean, like I said, we have tens of millions of fans on Facebook. We've got a couple million Twitter followers. I think we have the kind of Instagram account that just blows my mind. I mean, you post one photo and there are like 1,000 likers within minutes. The volume is just nuts. And now what Pinterest is, I think, enabling people to do across different platforms with images and sort of how those images connect people to dialogue or to conversation is really interesting. And look, I mean, the inherent problem that I personally have with digital media is that you can sort of immediately go to a conversation about platforms or about the trick du jour. And that's actually misses the point, I think. What's more interesting to me was sort of what I was talking about before with my Starbucks idea, or other ways in which we're digitally engaged. I think, frankly, one of the more interesting things about us is Starbucks.com, the commercial website, and what we have sort of hanging from that in ways of engagement, how we're thinking about changing the way that people navigate that site, or find things like our global responsibility report coming off of that in ways that that responsibility report gives people the opportunity to engage with us in a dialogue. To me, that's a lot more interesting than sort of talking about what's the next Twitter or what's the next Facebook, which undoubtedly somebody's hatching in Silicon Valley right now, and we'll be talking about in 6 months. But I do see it as a connective tissue, and I think that it's changed the nature of our jobs, because for a long time, I don't know if you guys agree with this, but it used to be in PR that success was never being seen. You had the kind of job that like you couldn't even explain to your mom. You'd be trying to well, dear, do you write the story? No. Do you, are you in the photo? No. I mean, those kind of questions. What do you do? Yeah. What do you do? What is your special purpose? Yeah, I don't have one. I'm sorry, but but that used to be it. And so you would be judged based on the effectiveness of like the spokesperson for that story and how you set them up. And digital media has really changed that. I think it enables all of us to be a part of the dialogue. We've always had opinions. Now those opinions are as valid as those of the spokespeople that we staff or that we serve. So, and it's going to continue to evolve. But I think for a brand like ours that's so highly social, right? We're in a very social business. It's just an authentic way for us to engage. It's another way. I mean, if you think of our stores as a third place, maybe we start to think of sort of the internet or the digital media as the fourth place.
So quick question following up on that, Chris. So who owns Starbucks.com? Is it with the digital group, and then your group
kind of digital team
puts ideas for content or how to use that as a platform?
We process them, right? Yep.
Well, is there, I had a discussion with someone who is in a senior corporate position who said he sees his job as a strategic innovator because the company is looking to him for how digital media affects the company and affects everything the company does. And so the Starbucks, it seems to me that's a value, that Starbucks is innately a communicating porous company, and that here is one of the most amazing ways to do that. So it struck me that you're a policy advisor or involved in communications at that kind of a level, that your role has to be looking at that issue and how to enhance that innovation under the umbrella of what you're doing as a
Yeah, I totally agree with that statement. And I'd go one more, which is that, I think the way that we're thinking about the brand at Starbucks is really, kind of a Venn diagram of like, digital, traditional sort of public affairs and marketing and what we call a category organization, which is really how, when we think about like food, beverage, all the different lines of business that we're in, fundamentally we have to be thinking about how those things find the most effective channel to a customer or to a partner. So, yeah, I agree with that statement. It's an interesting way to look at your job too, as sort of like, the strategic innovator. But, I think there are a lot of people in any company who can kind of lay claim to that title. We have to be a little specific or granular about what we uniquely are responsible for.
One more question quickly. Yeah, ma'am.
Change the brand in a way you don't even own the brand. It's us. We own the brand as VAs. How did you manage?
Can you confirm that?
Yeah, so that's Henk's description.
Very specific in my own coffee. But how did you manage to navigate through that waters? Because you were touching something, changing something that other people felt that, hey, hang on, this is mine. Even if it's not really. How did you navigate that?
And it's such a great question too. It's so timely because do you guys remember what was happening at that point too? The Gap, MySpace. Do y'all remember that? So the Gap changed its logo, like literally in like a minute and a half before we did this, and to huge customer outpouring of grief, right? I mean, people were so attached. To your point, the Gap fan community was so attached to the manifestation of the logo and the brand, and frankly, the change got rolled back. They went back to where they had come from, and kind of came out and apologized, said they hadn't engaged the right way. So I mean, we have this sort of rich trove of very recent data of kind of, that was perhaps not the way to do that. What is the way we should be thinking about doing that? And so we took a different approach. one thing that we did was we shared, and in hindsight, I mean, it's funny, right? Because we had a betting pool going about when it was going to leak. We were so sure that it wasn't going to make it. I mean, the people on the team actually had they kind of claimed dates on a calendar because we were just sure it wasn't going to make it, because the whole approach was, as you described, we went back to the design community, we went to people within the Starbucks community who self-identify as super passionate. Our marketing team actually has a mechanism that they call a passion panel, where they can go to these folks in sort of a Q&A format or a focus group format to get feedback. And we got feedback, we got a lot of it. So we essentially asked people under NDA to review not sort of the whole wealth of brand materials that we have, but a pretty good cross-section, so they could see what we had in mind with the logo, how it would show up on cups, how it would show up on stores, how it would show up on our partners. They got a pretty good view of it. And we took on some of that feedback. I don't think we made any fundamental pivots, right? Like, we didn't hear anything that said, like, oh my God, we're about to go over the cliff, we should stop doing that. But it helped a little bit in terms of how it would show up, and it helped a lot in terms of our messaging. And so we got all of this input over about a 45-day period, thinking that that would help inform the way that we communicated. And maybe the one way that we, in hindsight, were the most effective with this is that often it's unclear why a brand would do that, right? It looks capricious or random. Sort of like, hey, we woke up one day and didn't like the siren with the little thing and having her in anymore. We're going to change it. So we had Howard actually film a 6-minute video in which he described, not in granular detail, but he did sort of craft a narrative around, here are the business reasons why it's appropriate for Starbucks at this moment in time to unlock the siren from the Starbucks coffee circle. Here's what we're doing about that. And literally we just stuck the video out on the web and then let people comment. And so it became, again, more of an engagement, where people felt like they'd been heard. We heard on Twitter, we heard on Facebook. Literally every mechanism that we had to collect feedback we were doing. We were using that to sort of tweak our external messaging in terms of the way that we were going out and telling the story. And I think in the end, we actually experienced very little pushback from the core constituencies that we cared about the most, at a time when there was clearly a lot of passion around don't move my cheese, don't mess with my brand. And people, I think, still to this day feeling very much like a brand is to some extent a co-created kind of thing. I still believe that. So in some ways, I think that process helped teach us kind of the value in that co-creation, and probably informed the way that we still to this day talk about what we're doing with the brand when it shows up in places where we've never been before. And that'll be increasingly more kinds of things.
We are out of time. Corey, I want to thank you so much for coming down to join us. It sounds like you have plenty of things that you've ducked in order to come down here. But fascinating, tremendous story. Starbucks just so much part of our community here, and really thought of as a thought leader and a visionary in terms of the whole communication thing. So
thank you for asking us. I'll hang out for a few minutes if you guys want to talk or have any other questions. And Tim, thank you for doing this. It's great.
Thank you.
So Danny says we can put Starbucks. So.
We're going to let Tim go because
We're
we're
gonna try.
sensitive to his time. Except I need the mic back. I don't know about you, but I have dreams about AB failures. All communicators do, right?
It's a reality.
Right. Volume? Maybe. Felt pretty. Oh. Can you guys hear it at all? Okay, we're all having fun.
When I'm opening, I have to get up real early in the morning. The first thing I do is I get the kettle going, pour my coffee, and I'm out the door. What's up, Starbucks? Welcome to Starbucks, you guys. So what I like about Starbucks is all the customers who come in, they're all local, so they know your name, you know their name, you know their name. All right, Justin, here's that tall latte. Yeah, just a good vibe, really. I think my customers I'll describe it as outgoing.
Hey Patrick, can I interest you in a tasty pastry today? Maybe a CD for the car, a pound of beans for the neighbor?
Just try and put a smile on everyone's face, brighten everyone's day. I would definitely say that I structure my life around snowboarding right now, and Starbucks has really just enabled me to bounce around from mountain town to mountain town. Snowboarding makes me feel like I'm floating. That's where I have the most fun, when I feel the most free. Yeah, it's just an overall good feel.
Now I can't get it to stop playing.
Thanks, Danny.
All right. Thank you very much, Corey.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you too.
So I appreciate your flexibility. We're going to go ahead and we're going to take a break now. We're going to let you have a 15-minute break. We did have some extra time built into our schedule in our second break this afternoon, so we're going to be able to catch up and get back on schedule without a problem. But we'll go ahead and take a break now and get set up, and then we'll transition to Mark Allen. Thank you.